All right, everybody, welcome to the Otherppl Show. I'm Brad Listi, and I'm in Los Angeles. It's great to be with you. Welcome to my podcast. I have a great episode for you today. It's a perfect Sunday episode for these times. My guest is Amanda Yates Garcia, also known as the Oracle of Los Angeles. Amanda is an old friend of mine, and she has guested on this program a couple of times before. She is a witch. She is an author. She is a thinker. She is an activist. And we just had an outstanding conversation. I'm very happy to be able to share it with you today. I was trying to put together an episode for today, and I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to talk with somebody about this feeling that I have that we are living in a time of escalating darkness. Not that I'm breaking any big news, but there's just this undercurrent of dread, if I'm being honest, that I feel. And this sense of almost disbelief that normal life is carrying on while we have criminals in the White House and we have the entire planet experiencing ecological collapse and the guardrails coming off. And then, of course, the horror show that is unfolding in Gaza. It's too much. It's overwhelming. And so I thought I would reach out to Amanda, who, incidentally, in addition to being a witch, is also the author of a book called Initiated, which I talked to her about back when it was published to great acclaim. It has since been translated into 6 languages. Amanda Yates Garcia, a.k.a. the Oracle of Los Angeles, also has her own podcast. It is called Between the Worlds, which it looks at Western mystery traditions through a mytho-poetic lens, and it has been downloaded over 2.5 million times. Amanda is also the founder of Mystery Cult, which you can find on Substack. She has more than 20,000 followers there. It's an online and in-person community dedicated to eco-somatic ritual practice and cultivating radical enchantment. And who doesn't need a little radical enchantment right about now? That's how I feel. That's the impetus for wanting to talk to Amanda, to bring her onto the show and to have a conversation. And you're going to hear it in just a moment. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. Just hit the subscribe button. I would appreciate that. You can also subscribe on YouTube, and you can follow me on Bluesky and Instagram. Don't forget as well that I have a weekly email newsletter. You can sign up for it over at bradlisti.substack.com. And don't forget to check out my new company, Deep Dive, a new learning platform that specializes in the creation of in-depth audio courses. The debut course from Deep Dive is called How to Write a Novel, and it features more than 50 hours of never-before-heard conversations with dozens of today's most celebrated contemporary authors, including Emily St. John Mandel, Vivi Ganeshananthan, Steve Almond, Purchista Hakpur, Hannah Pittard, Lynn Steger-Strong, Stephen Graham Jones. The list goes on. It is an incredible resource, more than 50 hours of insight, inspiration, and instruction from the best of the best. So check it out at www.deepdive.audio. You can stream the course online, or better yet, via the Deep Dive app. You can find all of the links at www.deepdive.audio. Check it out. All right, so as I was saying, I reached out to Amanda Yates Garcia, and the reason that I did it is that I follow her on Instagram, and I'm a fan of her posts, and I've been kind of drawn to what she's up to. It's resonating with me, which then led me to a kind of self-interrogation. Why is this so? I'm scrolling on Instagram all the time, and people are posting, obviously, all the time, but not everybody's posts are resonant, but hers are. And I started to think to myself, like, okay, Brad, like, you're into posts by a witch. Like, witchcraft is interesting to you. It's resonating. What she's saying is making sense. And it's not like witchy stuff. She's not like brewing potions or anything. It's more about radical enchantment and eco-somatic ritual practice and nature and, resisting what's happening in Gaza and resisting what's happening in this country and to our ecologies and all that kind of stuff resonates with me. Because, we're living through fucked up times. It's intense. It feels like we're either at some kind of crescendo or we're heading to some kind of crescendo. Another way of putting it is that maybe we're in some kind of free fall collectively. In which case, it made sense to me to bring in a witch. Let's talk it out. And we just had an excellent conversation. And I really appreciate Amanda and the work that she does. She is, in my view of things, a true radical. And you will hear us talk about this word in the conversation ahead, how it is much maligned and misused and misunderstood. And I don't know about you, but I feel alienated a lot of the time by modern existence and the value systems propagated by contemporary culture, contemporary American culture in particular. Makes me feel like an extraterrestrial or something. Like, what am I doing here? Where is my place in all of this? What is this? I just often feel like my value system and the way that I see the world and the things that I care about and my hopes for the future and my vision of how things could be. None of this seems to align with what I tend to see on the internet, on social media, on television, in our political culture and our entertainment culture, our musical culture, oftentimes. It's this feeling of everything kind of sounding the same and looking the same and feeling the same and making me not feel good and helping to deliver me an abiding sense of dis-ease. It's this kind of undercurrent of alienation, which, this is nothing new. I've been talking about feeling alienated on this podcast for many years. So if you've listened for any amount of time, you're probably aware that Brad Listi is alienated. Nobody winds up writing books and podcasting in his garage if he's super in sync with mainstream America. But it does feel like it's gotten more intense over the past year or two or three. I mean, it's been building. And now it feels like it's accelerating into the darkness with Trump and Gaza and economic inequality and economic misery and cruelties inflicted on marginalized people and healthcare getting ripped away from disabled people and the obscene rise of the oligarchy and all of these shitheads on yachts and the ecological catastrophe brought on by fossil fuel companies and hypercapitalism, all of that stuff. So if you're out there and you're listening to me right now and you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I relate to this, I feel this, then I think you should be aware of the Oracle of Los Angeles. Amanda Yates Garcia is doing work that speaks directly to these kinds of feelings and concerns. And of course, she's doing so largely outside the constructs and institutions that most people are enmeshed in, happily or not. Many of these constructs and institutions are, of course, part of the problem. And so I think this is a big part of why she resonates with me. I think instinctively I'm drawn to the margins, and I tend to believe that's where the most interesting people are, and where the most interesting thinking tends to happen. I mean, if you look around, if you turn on the television or scroll on your phone or turn on the radio, you do all the mainstream stuff. How does it make you feel? Where does it leave you? I know where it leaves me, increasingly. It's not a great place. It leaves me feeling disillusioned and disgruntled and often despairing. So it does feel to me, and I think it feels to a lot of us, like we are in some kind of time of transformation where old models are crumbling, whether they're being torn down by bad actors or they're disintegrating of their own volition because they don't serve us anymore or they have been revealed to be fraudulent. It's happening. And the course that we are on is unsustainable. I think most reasonable people can agree. So it's a dangerous time, and it can be unsettling and scary, but it's also a time of great opportunity. And Amanda Yates Garcia speaks very eloquently about the real dangers and the real possibilities at hand. It's not an easy thing to do, to talk about all of this stuff as well as she is able to talk about it. And I just loved our conversation. It's a bit of a curveball episode, but it is ideal for a Sunday, and I'm very happy to share it with all of you right now. So let's get to it. Here I am with Amanda Yates Garcia, the Oracle of Los Angeles.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. COVID was really good for the witch business. Quarantine was very good for the witch business. It really pushed me online. I'd been dragging my heels about going online. I was really an in-person kind of witch biz sort of person. And by going online, my business expanded. I became an internationally recognized witch.
Wow.
Which was great. This current moment is much more difficult, I think, for everyone for a variety of reasons. One reason is the witch market became very saturated. I feel like I was part of a pioneering cohort of witches, kind of elders in the witch community. And now, you can't throw a crystal without hitting a witch somewhere in, Los Angeles and beyond. So there's a lot more competition. And also, I actually make most of my living right now through Substack. So I have an online community that I run through Substack. And what they're really paying for, rather than just like my writing, which is common to most Substack writers, is that they're getting paid for their writing. But in my case, it's more of a community. So I lead rituals for the full moon once a month, and people join me for that. And I have a reading group, and we read and talk about literature. And they get a witch guide every month, so they download that. And so it's really about, supporting them in their spiritual work throughout the month, throughout the year. And I still do see clients one-on-one. And of course, there's a huge need for that, right? People really want it. They're really hungry for it. And anybody who ever does ritual or who does this one-on-one work with someone who's really experienced over a long period of time will see the benefit of it. And so they'll want to do it. But people are also very anxious right now. So people are less inclined to spend money on, subscription services and things. I feel like it's a mixed bag. And also, I went back to school. I'm in a doctoral program at UCLA right now. So that also has meant that my time has become much more labored.
I bet. What are you getting a doctorate in?
Well, the short answer is that I'm getting a doctorate in culture and performance, but most people don't know what I mean by that. So my research focuses on trees, really, and deforestation and the consequences of trees, of deforestation on our souls, basically, starting with the enclosure of the commons in the early modern Northern Europe. But it's also very much about ritual and land use and our connection to the land, and how when that is destroyed, that it also entails a certain degree of soul loss or trauma within individuals and communities, and the potential for ritual as a way to intervene in or rehabilitate our settler colonial relationships to the land.
Well, for people listening who might be new to the show or who might be new to you and your work, there might be some people out there who are like, wait a minute, Brad's talking with a witch. And you, by the way, you've been on this program before, so we've talked
multiple times.
Yeah. So it's not like new territory, but some people, it might be new for them. And there might be people I could imagine who would be like, well, wait a minute, she's declared herself a witch. Like, what is a witch? Like you were saying earlier, like witches are kind of proliferating these days. And there's lots of people who are calling themselves witches who might not really be invested in the actual work the kind of work that you're doing. So you just talk a little bit about what you do in this word witch, like definitionally.
Yeah, when I first started using the word witch, well, first of all, I was brought up practicing witchcraft, right? My mom is a witch in the lineage of reclaiming, which is a West Coast, Californian tradition of witchcraft that kind of came into being in the late 70s and early 80s, but has roots in North American folk magic, basically, and many other lineages. So I actually started calling myself a witch professionally as an evolution of my art practice. I have an MFA in writing and an MFA in film and video, but my work was really kind of studio-based art practice. And when I got out of grad school at CalArts, I started holding public rituals as a kind of performance practice, really. And the way that people reacted to it was, well, it was very polarized. So some people reacted to it as if they had found some kind of an answer, that it really meant a lot to them. They were immediately vulnerable. They would immediately start crying, when I would do these performances. And that opened my eyes to this idea of like, oh, there's something really powerful, something very important that's happening here. And then the other cohort of people would be like, this is bullshit. I don't believe in this, which I thought was very strange because, I was holding these rituals in art gallery contexts. So I'd be surrounded by other work, films, sculptural installations, paintings. And so it was strange to me that someone would say, I don't believe in this in the context of an art gallery. So it showed me that there was already like an ontological barrier for a lot of people, which I found interesting.
So can I just interrupt? I want to ask you like what a ritual in like an art gallery would look like. Like, what does that even mean?
Well, one of the first ones that I did was like I built this city hall out of cardboard. It was like a sculptural city hall out of cardboard, and I was inside of it. And I was like channeling the spirit of the city. This was the very first one that I did. And, it was at Human Resources, which is in Chinatown, which is virtually in view of City Hall. And I was also thinking at the time, this was many, many years ago, like 2 decades ago, of like the cardboard cities that were, in Skid Row. And I was thinking about authority and whose authority we trust. And when someone speaks, the authority that we privilege them with, and how everybody in a city is really participating in the kind of spirit of it. I think that's what I was thinking about. It's so long now. And so that was one of the first ones. And people would have to kind of crawl in on their hands and knees to come and speak to the Oracle of Los Angeles. That's how I got my name, actually. And yeah, people would come in, and some of them, like I said, would bring these really intimate and personal issues, like, will I ever have another child? How can I fulfill my dreams? What do I need to do to be happy? And they would cry and they would open their hearts. And, for an artist, I think all artists really want to connect with people. They really want to move people. They want to engage with people on a soul level. And so that was very fulfilling for me. I also did a performance there called Capitalism Exorcism. So it was like an exorcism for the spirit of capitalism that had colonized our minds and things like that. I did another one called Devouring Patriarchy, where we made this effigy of a patriarch out of bread, and then we ate the bread to kind of reclaim the power of the patriarchy, and all sorts of things like that. Yeah. So
when you were doing these kind of ritualistic, kind of like performance art pieces, is that a fair way to characterize it?
Yeah, I would say, happenings.
When you're doing those and you would see this kind of polarized response where some people would be really moved by it and open to it, and some people would, I think, maybe like recoil or like push back even because they felt like it was
religious. They were like, she is being sincere and I don't believe in this. So this is dumb. I also have to say that there was a major gender divide. And that was kind of primarily what interested me, is that generally women and queer folks would be like, I'm down with this. This means something to me. I'm so glad to be seeing this. And a lot of the time, straight male, particularly white men, would fold their arms and say, I don't believe in this kind of shit, basically.
Shocker.
Very shocking. Who would have thought that that's the way that it would go down, right? But I was really interested in that, and also I was at a place in my work where I was really thinking about whose authorities I trusted. The voice of authority that I trusted, and I wasn't making work for the white male establishment. I was making work for my community, my people, the people that I cared about, the people that I was intimate with. And since people that I was intimate with and cared about were responding to my work, I was like, this is the right path. This is what I need to do. And then also what ended up happening was I was liberated by this, because then my work started to be supported by particularly the women and queer folk in my community, right? So they would come and they wanted to see me privately. They wanted to engage with my work in that way. And they would pay me to do that so that I could continue to do that work. And so I realized I don't need to get the permission. I don't need to be invited in by the art establishment or the establishment of prizes and awards and commercial art gallery, which in general as a performer, is very difficult to support yourself anyway. And so there was an economics of this too, in the sense that once I started to be supported by my community, I stopped trying to make my work conform to a legibility that the more institutional powers could understand, and instead started to really work towards the needs of my community and what they were longing for, what they were hungering for, and also to follow my own curiosity. And that really evolved my practice until I became quite well known and successful in the witch field, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But then in the past few years, a kind of major rupture happened in my work on multiple levels. So first of all, I kind of reached, I would say, the top of my field. I was one of the best known witches in the country. And I was also very frustrated with I ran into a wall, and that I started to realize the importance on a foundational level of the ontological positioning of witchcraft and paganism and animism, and that it was something that was absolutely direly needed in terms of the way that people conceive what reality is. Like, if we're going to continue as a species, if all life on Earth is going to continue, then a major ontological shift needs to happen. And I really started to see how essential the kind of work that I and others like me were doing was to that process. And I kept running into this wall over and over and over again about this idea of the witch and witchcraft. And so when I would be interviewed by, major publications or whatever, they couldn't really get beyond the word witch, right? We'd stop there every time. And so I started to be very frustrated by that. And then what happened was October 7th. And I had just started my graduate program, my doctoral program at UCLA, like a month before that. And that shook me to my core. The whole genocide, watching the way that empire has been functioning, and being at UCLA as well, and seeing the way the administration treated the students who were resisting with such extraordinary violence, mind-blowing. It's something that you really have to be present to it, to hear the thunder of the helicopters and see the little red dots of like laser rifle, AR-15, whatever, pointed at the head of a 20-year-old who's saying no genocide, to really understand what we're up against. And when I saw that, it shattered me to my very core and created this major sense of urgency in my work, so that I actually stopped pretty much posting on like Instagram. I just couldn't talk about the same things that I felt like get you traction on Instagram, at least in the world that I was in. And I'd been feeling that for a long time, but I didn't want to talk about astrology anymore. I didn't want to talk about the kinds of things that had made people respond to my work so much before. I felt like it was a waste of time when we were facing such a earth-shattering atrocity. And also I came to the realization like that we'd always been facing this, especially certain communities had always been like at the front line of empire's violence. And so I don't want to say astrology, witchcraft, tarot, all of these things, I don't want to say they're frivolous, because they're absolutely not. And they're a really important tool to be able to help us access our inner world, which is crucial to being able to overthrow and overcome empire. But I couldn't figure out how to talk about it simultaneously, like watching children have their arms blown off or starving. I went through a major personal crisis, and I think I'm just starting to come out of that now. And I started to feel like more prepared to make the sacrifices necessary to continue to work in a way that feels like it's an integrity to me. Because we're all going to have to make those sacrifices, because empire is going to reward us if we capitulate, and it always has done. And it's going to punish us if we resist. And sometimes resistance looks like saying what you see to be true instead of talking about what it wants you to talk about, like ways to make your wrinkles go away, or ways to, make sure that you make $1 million even though your neighbor might starve and be blown up or something, even though all the aquifer will be dried up. And even if it isn't dried up, it's going to be poisoned with hexane or something, but you could still might be okay. Empire says, like, if you just keep showing up to work, and if you just say the things we want, then maybe you're going to get out alive. And I just didn't want to do that. I didn't want to participate in that anymore. And I didn't know what to do, how to not participate, but I decided to figure out how to do it. And so that's what I'm doing now.
What have the results been? I mean, like what I would say too is like, as you were talking, I was thinking of the word radical and radicalized. I've heard so many people over the past few years, especially in response to what's happening in Gaza, talk about how like I'm radicalized, like things are so bad this is so outrageous, and the violence is just so intolerable, and the brutality of it, the cruelty of it is just it's a lot to try to absorb. And then I was thinking about the fact that like you started from a place where you're like making a living as a witch and kind of living outside of the major capitalist institutional constructs anyway. So I felt like to the average American, you would have been radical to begin with.
I was radical, but now I'm so much more radical. Yeah. There's levels of radicalism. When I first started, I did, of course, want the validation that I think all artists are trained to want to sort of make it in the rat race of award cycles and, big, 5 publishers or, all of those things that we're kind of trained to think mean success to us. And I think also most artists just want to keep being able to make their work, right? Like most artists are like, I don't care. I just want to be able to keep going. I want to be able to keep doing this without having to give it up. And so I was like that. And I, of course, still want to continue to be able to make my work. But it's become increasingly clear to me that we're in such crisis, this polycrisis. And there is a way out of it. And also our ancestors have been trying to show us this for so long. I feel so grateful right now as I become more and more radicalized and seen with greater and greater degrees of clarity, the bottomless lengths that empire will go. Like there's nothing it won't kill. There's no sacred thing it won't betray. There's no child it won't murder and maim. There's no land it won't destroy. There's no bottom to the hellishness that it is willing to enact in order to pursue its suicidal aims.
So let me just interrupt 1 second. And you said the term polycrisis, which just means that like the crises that we are facing are manifold. But like, I'd like to just for listeners to drill down into that term and to maybe try to talk a little bit about what the polycrisis entails. And then also this word empire and the way that empire is like, we're in a confrontation with it, maybe whether we know it or not. But I think there might be people listening that are like, wait a minute, what does she mean by empire? So polycrisis and empire.
Yeah. So the polycrisis is, first of all, there's the ecological crisis, which we're all hopefully becoming increasingly aware of. And, they call it the climate crisis, but that's a euphemism in a way, because it's not just about temperature. It's also about weather. It's about the ability of life to sustain itself on Earth, birds being able to eat the insects and the times that things bloom, and also the consistency, the stability of our ecology, the what's it called? The Gulf Stream, and whether or not it slows down, like whether or not even continues. The ability of life to continue as we've known it on Earth is part of the polycrisis. And then there's this ongoing crisis of colonialism. And for many people, I think, especially people in the arts, I think we have to be honest that a lot of the people in the arts do have kind of a bourgeois middle class background. I don't want to discount all the people who don't or who come from working class backgrounds, but it's extremely difficult if you come from a working class background to even break through to the point where you can focus on things beyond just daily survival or survival of your family, right? Many artists have come from the working class and have been able to do that. But if you look at more of the institutional artists that we know, like most of them are from a middle class or privileged background. So even though we might look out at the world and say, oh, that's awful that is happening to XYZ person, it may not have fully hit home. That's not happening to other people. That's happening to us. that's part of this ontological shift that we need to remember, is that there is no separation between them and us. There is no separation between the ocean and us. There is no separation between the indigenous people who were genocided and are continuing to be massacred wherever in the world. So, when there are like police violence, police atrocities, when kids are killed in their elementary school by, mass shooters, when we are eating plastic, this is the polycrisis, and it's inseparable. So one thing it's all entangled. And that's the big part of paganism and animism that I think it can be really helpful as a framework, is that it's holistic. It doesn't have this separation of like, well, there's humans and then there's animals and then there's elemental being. There's like the ocean and there's God up there and he's separate and he's outside. Or there's reason and there's emotion. Reason and emotion are contingent and entangled with one another. They're not separable. Nothing is separable. So that's the polycrisis that I'm talking about, is that radical entanglement of life on Earth and beyond. And it's in deep shit. It's unraveling everywhere we look. Particularly, I think people will notice, the political institutions that we have naively believed were good or stable, or at least, sufferable, a more perfect union, quote unquote. But it wasn't even close to perfect. It was genociding. It was enslaving. It was cutting down. It was deforesting from the very beginning. There was never a time when it wasn't doing that. And the general population has been like, well, if it's not happening to me, that's sad. And it's important that we recognize it is happening to you, because it's also happening to your own soul. And that is the main crisis, I think, of empire, is that it colonizes our minds so that we can't see that it's happening to us. We lose contact with our sense of compassion, community, solidarity. We don't even see how that's possible. We don't see how traumatized we are. We don't know how to relate to one another. An example that I think is really helpful is, do you know James C. Scott? He's a writer. It's a theorist.
That kind of rings a bell.
He wrote a book called Seeing Like a State, which is really amazing. And it's about how states operate. And in it, he talks about this thing called a normal bomb, which is a forest it's the first forest management happening in Germany. And these plantation forests. And when you do these plantation forests, you clear cut all the old growth forests and you plant Sitka spruce trees that are, they grow fast, they grow straight, they plant them all in a straight line so that they can measure exactly how much wood they're going to get from this productive forest. All the other beings go away, it kills the squirrels and the birds and the mycelial networks and all that, goes away. But so trees communicate in their root systems through these mycelial networks. Many of us are aware of this now. When you cut those networks, you cut their ability to communicate. They become atomized individuals and they become much weaker and much more vulnerable to any kind of crisis, whether it's a strong wind or too much rain or, a beetle that comes through. They can't communicate. They can't help one another. They lose that communicative capacity for solidarity that is going on in their root systems. And all of us have had that happen through processes of colonialism over thousands of years. And that's not just people like Indigenous Americans, for instance. That's bad enough. But so even for people of my lineage, for instance, Northern European people, I was just doing some research in Ireland and Scotland, both of which have been colonized. And then England also was colonized by the Romans. And we forget how traumatizing that is. And then over generations and generations, people have lost what their mycelial networks, essentially, their ability to communicate, their ability to see themselves in relation and to understand their connectedness, not just with each other, but also with the more than human world, with the land, with the rivers, with the animal people, with the plant people. They've lost that ability to connect, and they don't even know how traumatized they are. So, before I showed up here today, I was thinking about all of this, and I was thinking, for instance, about my father, who every time I see him for the past 30 years tells me these same stories. He's always complaining about his father, who was abusive. He was a yeller. He sort of abandoned the family. He was physically violent, physically abusive. My dad always he says this litany over and over. All I wanted was to just love my dad. And he wouldn't let me. He talks about it constantly. And yet my dad, if I were to say, oh, you're traumatized, Dad. Your dad abused you, which I have said. And he was like, what? No. If I were to say, oh, people are behaving violently in the streets because they are traumatized, you'd be like, oh, bullshit, blah, blah, blah. Right? People can't recognize how traumatized they are. They're completely cut off from their own feeling. They're completely cut off from each other. He sits in his armchair by himself. And we can recognize that in all of our families, right? Of people who are traumatized and can't recognize it and externalize their trauma onto other vulnerable people.
Yeah.
And then we're seeing it writ large, of course, in Palestine, which is, I think, what has really shaken up everybody when we see Israel, who likes to conflate itself with Judaism, exploiting the trauma of the Holocaust to manipulate people to abandon their own soul and say, yes, it's good that we're killing these children, or we should continue starving the entire population, and doing the exact same things that were done to them. And yet we're all doing that all over the world because we've lost this. Well, in my modality, it's called soul loss, right? And soul, if we're going to define that term, soul is connectivity. Soul is recognition of one's entanglement with all life. So soul loss is a severance of that ability to connect and to feel oneself connected. It's a radical, soul deep, bone deep loneliness and isolation that leaves people willing to do any kind of horror in order to just to be promised that maybe they'll be okay if they do what they're told. And so to go back to your question around empire is just a way of saying this traumatizer system, what Achille Mbembe would call the necropolitics, which is a political system that is organized around killing people, who gets to live and who gets to die. And not just people, but also ecologies. And of course, people are not separate from their ecologies.
But they think they are.
Exactly. So empire is, kyriarchy is another word. So this dominator mentality. We could also call it the state. The challenge with finding the language around this is that we don't all agree on the terms, right? So we don't all even know what we're talking about when we're trying to address who is or what is the cause of our suffering and this crisis. How do we even start to address it? And what's wrong now? One of the many things that is wrong now is that we tend to point towards more laterally than the oppressor, which, if people will say, oh, well, you have to have compassion for everyone. We can't leave anyone behind. And that is true to a degree, right? Like, the only way out of this polycrisis is for all of us to wake up to solidarity and recognize that we are in this together and to care for one another. Care is the only way forward. And it has to be care for the most vulnerable among us. And this is something that, Black women, for instance, have been telling us for hundreds of years, shouting it off the roof. And for whatever reason, racism and many other reasons, we haven't listened. Also, Indigenous people who were able to, over hundreds of years, figure out how to live together and to live in solidarity with the world around them so that it could keep nourishing them. They've learned these ways, which is we're only as strong as the most vulnerable being among us, which is completely antithetical to the way the empire thinks or operates. For empire, we're only as strong as the one person on top who is able to dominate everyone else. And it gets us to participate in our own oppression and to think it's right and to think it's good. So the biggest problem right now is the colonization of our minds, where we are convinced that if we just do it like Daddy says, that everything's going to be okay. And it's not going to be okay until we recognize that, solidarity is the only way forward. And the good news is solidarity feels so good. It's like the images of the rapture from the medieval period. It's like a light that comes into your life that you would never be willing to trade once you experience it for yourself.
Okay, because as you're saying this, I'm thinking of back, I guess would it have been in June when there were these big protests, and I was out in the streets with people. I ran into some friends, like IRL, which is always nice, but in this context, it felt like such a deep relief to be like actually doing something and to just be out with other bodies who were like, this is fucked up. We gotta say so. It's not, it's a little thing, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, but it meant a lot. And I think it was maybe me experiencing this feeling of solidarity. It felt medicinal.
Yeah. Well, so the first time that I really ever kind of in my life felt this solidarity was actually at UCLA on the night that the police came onto campus to break apart the encampments, the protest encampments. In my department, there was kind of a safe zone where all the community of resistance had got together to provide food, to provide eye masks for like the chemical weapons that were being used on the students, to if people needed to sleep or to rest or to stand back for a little while, they could come sleep. There was clothes. There were, if they forgot their sweatshirt or whatever, all the community had come together to bring this together. And whatever people needed, they could get there. And then they would go back out and continue with the resistance. They would come back and be resourced. And that feeling, the people who would get the goggles or the face masks, would say thank you. And then they would go out and continue their resistance. And then they would come back. And all of the stuff there had been provided for by the community, right? Everybody had got together to take care of one another's needs. And there was a sense of like, I need you and you need me. We're here for each other. Like, we are caring for one another. And to be honest, like I've been to so many protests. I've called my representatives or whatever, I've canvassed, I've done all of that. And I never, I'm almost 50 years old and I had never felt solidarity before. Like we've got you. We're not going to let you fall. Like, we're not going to let you go hungry. We're not going to let you be tired. There's a place here for you. You belong here. We need you. Thank you for being here. And also like a place where I could share that love with other people. where I could love my community and be loved in return. Like, I'd never felt that. And when I felt that, it was like, oh, this is what they're trying to destroy. Because the encampments had that on UCLA campus, right? What they didn't say in the LA Times about the encampments was that they had food provided for people. They had, like, what's it called? They had these little groups of community care, like, where they were talking, helping each other process the grief of what they were witnessing. They had blankets. They had little art studios where people could go make art together. Once you feel that, once you feel like, oh, I belong, and I don't need to be famous, and I don't need to be the richest, most successful one to be loved and to have a place and to know that my body is going to be taken care of and I'm going to eat. Once you feel that, nothing Empire can offer you seems tempting. It's like, what? Like, you can't make me feel safe. You can't make me feel loved. You can't make me feel like I'm a part of this beautiful group. There's nothing you can give me that's as good as this. We're also afraid, like, oh, if I gain 5 pounds, or if I age, or if I don't win that award, or, if my next book isn't as good, then I'm going to lose love. I'm going to lose my partner. I'm going to lose my friends, or, I'm going to be out on the street. I'm going to be homeless. I'm going to have to get a job that, like, destroys my soul. We're all sort of subconsciously worried about that and thinking about that all the time. So Empire has colonized our mind and makes it so that all we can think about is making it so that we are acceptable to Empire. It's really tragic, because we could all just be caring for each other and enjoying this beautiful world and being in solidarity with one another. And yet every time we aim towards solidarity, Empire comes and tries to unravel that, break that apart, make us forget that we're in contact and connection with one another, that we belong to one another. And so that is the greatest tragedy of Empire, is the way that it colonizes our mind. And when we could be in solidarity with one another, instead, we're inspecting ourselves to figure out what is wrong with us, how are we failing, which just cuts us off. It cuts off our mycelial networks, our roots that are wound together and are creating these webs of connection. It severs those. But the good and beautiful news is that anything that reweaves those webs of connection is resistance. We can participate in resistance all the time. And so that's what I meant by being grateful to my ancestors, seeing now the ways that Empire is like, wants to burn libraries or, defund them. It wants to defund the arts. It wants to defund anybody who's trying to unhouse people, right? It wants to defund all of these things, or completely destroy or make fun of all of these lights that have been kept lit. And this is what's so inspiring to me. When we look back in our history, we can see over and over and over again, poets, writers, painters, freedom fighters, spiritual leaders, they're all Empire's constantly trying to silence them. And yet, despite all of that violence, people, our ancestors, our creative ancestors, have kept that little flame alive. The reason we could even read a novel, the reason we could even read a poem, anything that's ever moved us in our life, any meal that we've ever eaten in our life, is there because people out there have been fighting to keep that life-giving resource alive for us. And it's not like Empire just started, right? It's been trying to destroy everything for so long, and it hasn't been able to. And so this makes me feel so grateful for even the people, I'm not saying like, oh, all poems are equal in the eyes of God or whatever. Some poetry is, particularly magnificent, let's say. But even the people who were just writing, kind of eking out a little crappy poem. Like, they're keeping that alive. They're keeping poetry alive in our world. They're tending to it. And, even if the powers of empire, the powers of the state, the Trump administration, whoever, are successful in destroying and eroding all the social institutions that we've had that keep our imagination alive, because it's imagination that is key. Even if they are able to destroy all the art schools, to make it so that people don't read anymore, the imagination is not located inside the human mind. It's located inside of the all, the earth, the life force. They can never destroy it. They will never be able to get rid of it. It will always come back. But it may be in a more primitive form, and we'll have to rebuild it. But my passion now is to create refuges for beauty in the world, right? When we think about the history of this planet, there have been major mass extinctions events. Somewhere like 98% of all life died. And then out of that 2% that was clinging to the side of a volcano, 500 feet below ocean level, all life came back from that. So I want to create refuges. I want to create refuges for future generations so that they still have poetry. They still know what solidarity feels like, that we're keeping that alive. And also, resistance will come from the margins. If we tend to the margins, if we care for each other, if we remember how to be in community with one another, then we will survive this. Because the thing about empire is that it eats itself. It can't agree. It can't even agree with itself. So the more solidarity that we create, the more we'll have the energy and the resources to resist. But it will try and end everything. And we're in the end stage now, right? Where it's come to the point where there's nothing outside of itself to eat. So it has to eat inside of itself. But right now, what it's really wanting to do, the kind of final frontier of empire while we're still earthbound, is our minds. It's trying to colonize our minds deeper and deeper into our minds. It's going to try and make it so that even when we're asleep, we're advertised to, right? Like McDonald's golden arches appear in your dream world. It wants to colonize every single space. And the last kind of final frontier is the imagination, but it won't be able to.
It's so interesting hearing you talk, because there's so much crossover between what you're saying very eloquently, much more eloquently than I can ever manage to say it. But everything that you're saying resonates with me, even though I might be coming at things or looking at things through a slightly different lens. There's a reason why, your social media presence resonates so much with me. It's why I reached out to you. I was just I feel very simpatico with you. And as you were talking, I just so happened I do this thing where I post a picture of an author of on my Instagram every day when it's their birthday. I think I started it last November on what used to be known as Armistice Day, because it was Kurt Vonnegut's birthday, but it was also in the aftermath of the election. And it was a reflexive act. It wasn't something that I put a ton of thought into, but I was this will be a very tiny act of resistance that won't be a super drag for people to have to absorb. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes acts of resistance can be withering on social media, but I was I'm just going to celebrate authors and this tradition of literature, keeping that flame lit, as you were talking about. I think with this show, you were kind of crystallizing for me, maybe in ways that I wasn't fully aware of as you were talking. I was yeah, that's kind of what I want to do. I want to keep this lit and hopefully carry it forward so, people can listen to these interviews down the road or something and find in them some kind of creative fuel. But with this birthday project, I recently posted a photo of Diane DePrima, who was kind of like the female Beat, which I feel like is kind of I don't know. I don't know if she would have necessarily loved the way that everybody called her the female Beat, but that's just, everybody needs a shorthand, right? To try to make sense of people. But she was a contemporary of Allen Ginsberg and that whole set. And she was unique in the fact that she was a woman who was kind of holding her own with those dudes. It was a very masculine group, masculine energy was kind of prevalent with the Beats. But I always post a quote from the author on the day of their birthday along with their photo. And I don't know if this was the quote that ultimately made it to my Instagram, but it was a quote that I wrote down and it has been haunting me ever since. And she said, and I'm paraphrasing, ultimately the only war is the war on the imagination. And I've been thinking about it and I was like, yeah, that's it. And if people are out there and they're anything like me and anything like you, and you're trying to bear witness to the atrocities in Gaza or the horror show that is unfolding in the White House and the desecration of our ecologies and the suffering of marginalized groups, people living on the periphery and all the homeless people that we see in Los Angeles, just as an example, it's a lot to bear witness to. And it begs the question, like, well, what do I do? This can't be. And I don't know what the answer is, but I do know in some kind of like deep intrinsic way that we have to preserve our capacity to imagine a different way of being, like a radically different way of being. And it's heartening to hear you say that they can't take that away from us. And it makes sense that they would want to try.
Yeah, because they know how dangerous it is to them, right? That's why, even though explicitly they're going to say, the arts don't really matter, it's kind of a nice hobby or like a funny, cute thing your little daughter could do when the son is out doing something important, like, investment banking or whatever. But yet they intuitively know to go for the jugular of the arts every time they get into power, because they know, that's why the Israelis are bombing like the universities in Gaza, and there's they want to destroy our ability to connect with the ancestral lineages of creativity and imagination. They want to destroy our ability to think otherwise, to imagine an otherwise. And of course, they can't do that. It's their hubris that they think they're more powerful than the imagination, but they can cause a lot of suffering while they try. And so, yeah, one major antidote for all of us is to keep our imagination alive. That means to keep our inner world alive, to keep connected to our bodies, noticing what our bodies are experiencing, hunger, exhaustion, longing for connection. Most of us aren't aware when we're feeling those things. We're not able to listen to our bodies. We also need to develop skillfulness to be able to be in community with one another. We do not have that ability. We can barely even be in marriages or in families, like much less larger communities. We really don't know how to do that. We don't know how to be together. So practicing being together is a huge thing. But we do also really have to join together, right? We can't just do this from Instagram. And I definitely am all for whatever, call your reps or sign the petition, but that ain't going to do anything. I think it's good for them to know we're not going to make this easy for them, so they know that people are complaining. But really the only way for us to truly meet this crisis is to join together in real life with one another and put our imaginations together, because as individuals, we're never going to be able to imagine a way out of this, but together, collectively, our imaginations become even more powerful and potent. And one of the things that was different and why I felt solidarity in that community at UCLA versus like at a rally or something is because it's also about meeting material needs. If our material needs are met, then they have no weapons. They hold over us our fear of being homeless, or fear of losing our jobs, or fear of getting sick and then not having insurance. So we need to care for one another. That is a really big job. And we have no idea how to do that. That's one of the things that's the greatest threat right now, is that the left is so disorganized in its sense of it's scrambling all the time, right? And also another thing that's really happened is we are so self-oriented and self-critical. So we're spending all of our time crying at home into our pillow about, how we're not taken seriously by the art world, or how, we can't find the date of our dreams, which I get, I feel sad about those things too sometimes, but we're focusing so much on our own failures as individuals, and the failures are measured by the standards of the oppressor. And so we really have to rip out by the root in our mind this idea that there's something wrong with us, and instead focus on creating collective solidarities with one another, which, is our work cut out for us, right? It's like very challenging to do that. But I did want to speak a little bit to like how witchcraft or animism or pagan practice helps us do those things. And I'm not saying that that's the only way, but I am saying this is one way. And one of the reasons why is because of ritual. So ritual comes to us to help us mitigate times of risk. When we look around collectively, where do we see our rituals? Funerals, weddings, graduations. These are all rituals that we all collectively know, even though we've lost a lot of the rituals that maybe we would have had 1,000 years ago or whatever. But those are times of great risk. If we're getting married, that's a risky time, right? We're leaving our old life, we're entering a new life. We have rituals around childbirth, baby showers or whatever. And these are repetitive actions that have arisen from community. Everybody knows the word to the bat mitzvah song or whatever. And that helps us navigate collective these times. And so one of the reasons why a spiritual practice is so important is that it's this ritualized way of kind of keeping the ground of our inner world ready to plant, ready to garden. It's kind of weeding that ground, nourishing that soil so that we can grow from our imagination. Because the thing about empire is it's so powerful, and its ideological imperatives are so strong. They're like a river that if we do nothing, we just get swept up in that river. And we're all inundated from the moment we wake up. Like every morning I wake up and I do like Qigong or like gentle movement exercises. And I do that by watching a YouTube, right? And so every morning I get marketed to the first thing. I wake up and they're like, do you want to try Ozempic? Or like, you need this new binder, or like, here's the Botox that you need. And then I'll do my Qigong or whatever. So it's just this relentlessness of the ideological positioning of empire. And it's in everything. It's in our work. It's in the billboards that we drive by while we're sitting in traffic. It's everywhere. So we have to remember that it is so powerful that we need all the tools that we can get to stay connected to ourselves, to stay connected to our hearts, our inner worlds, because otherwise our inner world gets colonized. And so, people might have another strategy. Then, for instance, I have these full moon groups so that my community, at least, who, follow my work, every month we get together and we do this inner work to connect to our inner worlds, to connect to ourselves somatically, right? We do somatic exercises. We notice how we feel, for instance. This is one way of doing this, of maintaining this connection. So, that even if everything else goes awry, at least once a month, the full moon, we're going to have this ritual. We're going to do this together. And historically, there have been other ways of doing this, maybe churches or other kinds of groups, but I think the church has lost a lot of its persuasiveness. And similarly, I of course, I'm an advocate of therapy, and, I think that's good. But the problem is that whereas witchcraft is by very definition not institutionalized, it emerged as we understand it in the early modern period during the persecution of people who probably weren't even witches as we understand them. But it emerged as a target of empire and as a means of resistance to empire. So there's no head guy, right? There's no institutionalized hierarchy that is part of witchcraft, as much as it now is sort of being appropriated by the TikTok, crystal buying candle salespeople. But and no offense to anybody out there who sells candles or is a TikTok witch, that's not my critique. My critique is more about the strategy of capitalism to constantly undermine the revolutionary potential of whatever it is that's in antagonism towards it. But, things like therapy have a very specific lineage, which is rooted in Western modernity and, Vienna or, Freud or, the grand meta narratives of history. And so those lineages very much impact and inform the healing potential of those practices. And that lineage comes from a very individualistic perspective. So there's a lot of attempts now to, decolonize therapy, and a lot of people, particularly people of color, Indigenous people, Black people, queer people, who are trying to find other ways of practicing therapy. But I really think that we can't heal as individuals. We have to be in community. Healing means being able to be in community, because healing means being in connection. We have to be able to maintain our connection to our inner world, but we can only heal really and truly in community, because what our healing requires is that we have a sense of belonging and care and love. And you can't really just give that to yourself. In order for you to know that you're safe and loved and you're going to be okay, you need to have a community of people who help you understand that, and an ecology that helps you understand that.
Well, yeah, I think that maybe another of the reasons why your work is interesting to me and I respond to it is that I think I'm certainly among the set that feels alienated by a lot of the traditional institutions, religious and otherwise, political institutions, all of it. I just feel like an outsider. And I feel like the cultural value system is fundamentally at odds with my value system. And so it makes natural sense that somebody like me would be looking to somebody like you who's kind of operating outside of all that and working in ways that feel new, but as you keep saying, are deeply rooted in these kinds of ancestral lineages and the traditions of indigenous peoples and Black women through the decades and centuries who have been talking about communities of care and all this kind of stuff, because I feel it. When I hear you talk, I'm like, okay, this is resonating. It sounds true, right? You kind of know it when you feel it, or know it when you hear it, and you know it physically. And there's also this deep sense in me that of all the many things that are plaguing the world right now, all the darknesses that feel like they're pervasive and unrelenting, when I try to imagine a way forward and I try to conceive of what it is in human beings that has us in this place, the best that I can often come up with is that there's just a spiritual crisis. I'll also hear in New Age, I'll read in a book or whatever. It's there needs to be a mass evolution of consciousness. that sounds true to me, you know?
Yeah.
And then I'll be like, but Brad, you know, and this I think is maybe the disease of empire, right? That's kind of infiltrated my mind. Be like, well, this is utopian thinking. I know there are people listening who are like, yeah, it sounds great, but, you know, and I'll have conversations along these lines on a more practical level where somebody will be like, yeah, you know, universal healthcare sounds great, but how do you pay for it? You know, and universal pre-K sounds great, but how do you, you know, and people will have those kinds of beliefs without really having a firm footing in any of the actual math or logic or any of the true possibilities, nor will they be acknowledging the fact that these things exist all over the world just fine. You know, so it's not like it's impossible. It's just for some reason not happening here. It's worth our time to ask why. So anyway, that's kind of a jumble, but I do think that there are a lot of us out here, you know, wherever that is, who fall into this camp. We're alienated. We're radical. But I think the word radical gets a bad rap. It's like people, I think that's another thing that empire has done is it's made the word radical into this pejorative. It drives me crazy. It's like, if you're a radical, you're dangerous. And it's like, wait a minute. Wasn't radical kind of cool? It was like surf culture. And then the etymology of radical is the word root, which I always like to remind people. If somebody is radical, they are trying to get to the root of the matter at hand or to the deepest reality of the thing. And that is a very noble enterprise. So it's good to be radical, you know, in that sense. And
it's rad to be radical.
That's right. And I just think that's what you're doing. That's what you're trying to do. And you've got your lens and you've got your framework, and it's paganism and animism. And am I missing an ism? Is there another ism?
Well, I think it's also really important for people to understand that our concept of religion as well has been colonized. So a lot of the time when people hear people like me speak about, you know, gods or spirituality or the sacred, they're thinking about it through a lens that has been predetermined by monotheistic capitalism dominator culture. So for instance, you know, in a lot of indigenous traditions, I would say the majority of indigenous traditions, not that I know all of indigenous traditions, but commonly in indigenous traditions, there isn't like a god that's outside of the natural world who's kind of operating, pulling strings. In fact, in many indigenous traditions, potentially even, you know, the indigenous traditions of Northern European people, though we know so little about them, but there's a collective of powerful personages, right? So there's people who have agency and power within this living web of life. And then there's the winds who have power and agency. They're very, very powerful personages within this web. Or the deer people, or the oak people. But the gods are essentially, you know, spirits of the land. There's not like a god outside of and separate from in many indigenous practices. So when we think of gods, we think of either as like the Greek gods, who were already part of this transitional period to like monotheism, right? Who are this separate, they're up on a mountain. Whereas a more land-based understanding would be the god is the mountain itself. Very powerful. Not all powerful, but very powerful within the landscape, right? Within the situatedness of the people and the beings. So similarly, you know, when we think about animist traditions or pagan traditions, you know, there is no one totalizing thing. So what I mean by it, and what one of my community members or, you know, someone else who's working in this modality might say it means are different, because we are all bringing it in through our own filtering it through our own understanding and experience. But we ought not let empire colonize our understanding of the sacred and then just throw the sacred out because we can't believe in a God in a cloud out there telling us that we shouldn't be gay or whatever. I mean, it makes perfect sense that people be like, yeah, I don't believe in that. Of course I don't. But, for instance, in many of the indigenous practices of Turtle Island, I'm forgetting exactly which nation has this cosmogony, but the word Turtle Island. Do you remember this story about the beginning of the world and how at first there was just water, and then all the animals somehow, including people, ended up on the back of this huge turtle that was floating in the ocean. And then some of the animals, in order to create a space, I'm forgetting a big part of this, but I feel like they did this in order to help or protect, maybe it was humanity who was drowning or something. They go down into the swim to the bottom of the ocean, many of them dying as they try and do this to get land or to get soil to bring back up and to put on the back of this turtle so that we have place to live. And so the idea in that cosmology, the birth of the universe or the birth of the known world is all these beings coming together to help build. And in the Western monotheistic tradition is this idea of there was God who then created the world. But in many ways of looking, many other traditions, the world comes into being through multiple beings interacting with one another. Hydrogen and helium interacting, and they create this third thing, and then it interacts. So there's not just one originator. There's not just one imagination, but there's many that come together to co-create the world. And that makes a lot of sense to me, that there wasn't just a big bang where everything suddenly sprung into being. It was through relationship. And this is the primary premise of paganism and animism. The foundational value and even ontology way of seeing the world or life is that it is a relationship. The world comes into being through relationship.
Yeah. I mean, no, I'm a kind of I have kind of a Buddhist lens on the world, and you just basically summed up the Diamond Sutra, which can be boiled down to this is because that is. Yeah. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It's oh yeah. I couldn't be here without my parents and their parents before them. And not only that, I couldn't be here without the oxygen and the hydrogen and the teachers who taught me. And you know what I'm saying? Everything in the universe essentially has conspired.
And the water and the land and the oxygen. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's, it sounds kind of hippy-dippy, but it's just very easily observable fact. And it's also, when you sit with it for a while, a very deep truth that is radical.
Yeah, it's radical. And it's also really tragic that when people bring up the fact that we are living in these meshes of interdependence, that our first impulse, especially, I think for those of us who are participants in intellectual culture, to be oh, that's hippie dippy. That is so, the fact that is our first impulse is so undermining to our spirit, right? Because it's saying we want to honor that we are part of this larger web of life, and that it's all of us or none of us, right? That we all go forward together. And that is hugely beautiful and important for the survival of all beings. And yet, for many of us in intellectual culture, where we should be finding ways for us to live together, where we have, I would say, a responsibility, an intellectual responsibility to find ways to protect the most vulnerable among us and to create ways of moving forward together. I feel that is the job and the role of people who are, in intellectual fields, whether they're scholars or writers or whatever, that we're supposed to be working on behalf of our communities, that we have been so indoctrinated to treat that acknowledgement of interconnectedness as something kind of embarrassing.
Yeah. It's like the word radical being a pejorative, like then hippie is like a pejorative. It's like a dumb, long hair. And like, I get it. Sometimes it can be a little bit, there could be like a simpleton quality to that sort of thing.
Naive or a major critique of like hippie or new age cultures is this idea that it is often this kind of magical thinking that is oriented around consumerism, right? So that it's like, oh, I'm going to manifest, Mercedes or whatever.
Yeah, right.
And it's always talking about the feminine and the masculine, and I get why that's like embarrassing. but
there is a very valuable thing to be mined. There's something very beautiful and valuable inside of that people miss, I think, is what we're saying.
Yeah, I think people have a real longing for the sacred, and the sacred has been depleted from our daily life and experience. So it makes sense that they're trying to find a way back to that. And also, like, we've been very weakened by our educational systems, by, the systems of consumerism. And also, our political system has created within us this sense of dependence on authority to tell us what's what. So that, for instance, if we see some atrocity happening, one of our cities gets taken over by the military, all we can think to do is to petition the very people who are doing it to stop doing it. Like, that's as far as our imagination can go, because we've all been conditioned so much to be like, well, call your reps. But when we look around from the time that, you and I have been children, like, I haven't seen that they've responded that well. Like, most of the time when power does capitulate to the demands of the people, it's because of direct action. It's because the people went out and chained themselves to the tree, or, refused to, like, boycotted the bus system, or, would refuse to do what they said. So we've been trained to see that the only way that we can maybe get what we need is to ask nicely from the people who have created a whole system in order to prevent us from getting what we need. But that, to me, that is very naive. We think about like New Age being naive. I think it's very naive to think that the people who have created these systems of atrocity are going to somehow have a change of heart and just stop pouring poison into the water. Like, they're not going to. We have to stop them.
Yeah, and I've had conversations recently with friends, like usually via text. Like, that's kind of like the way that political conversations often unfold, right? Because there's like distance and time. You can measure your responses or whatever. But I was texting with a couple of friends of mine, and I would think I was like sort of being like, look at what's happening in New York City with Zoran. Like, he's an emblematic candidate of the kind of shift that I think we're going to see on the left. Like, that's my read on it. I feel like, okay, this is real. Like, it's manifesting in an actual election, And I had a friend be like, we need people in the center who can actually get shit done. And what I want to say to anybody who has that sense, and this is what I said to my friend, is I was like, where's the middle? And who gets to decide where the middle is? Because when I was a kid, it was very much the middle that fascism was bad and that resisting fascism was good. And we now live in a country where an entire political party, the entire American right, has been co-opted by a fascist movement. And it's considered fine to like rip some mother out of her car while her child cries in a car seat and to disappear her to some concentration camp in Florida, or to unleash the United States military on American soil, on American people. Like, that's the middle now. who decided what the middle is? We need to move the fucking middle. That's how I feel.
We need to break the tape. We need to break the wheel.
Yeah.
Like the whole, like, I don't want to participate in their whole system anymore. All I want to do is focus on creating community that cares for one another. Like, I don't want them to determine the question, the dialogue, the discourse, what we're talking about. The problem is, of course, that when we start to build collective systems of solidarity, then they will try to destroy them. Like with the Black Panthers, the most successful aspect of the Black Panthers was when they started creating these like school lunch programs, and they started providing for the community. And that's really when they started to get killed by the FBI or by the state, was when they were like, we opt out. We're not going to do this with you. Like, we're going to create our own system. And the one of the many, many unfortunate things about capitalism and colonialism and the state as we know it is that it requires an underclass, which Black people and Indigenous people have really, been the sort of designated group that has had to play that part for the capitalist overclass at their, constant suffering and assault. And whenever they've tried to find a way out of that, that's when the state really comes in, because they need them. The state needs them to keep functioning in its hierarchical system, so that capitalism always requires that there is a group of people who have to work for less wages or no wages, so that it can instill fear into everybody else, and also so that it can keep collecting its excessive systems of capital. So I admire them and think that they have the right way. And I think that they created systems and models that can be emulated. And I also think that if there's collective solidarity where, for instance, white people join with the underclasses as we know them, that is when real change can happen. Because when the majority of people start to identify and start to protect the people who are most vulnerable, that is when the system just won't be able to maintain itself. And they're all constantly trying, the powers that be, right? The system, the state is constantly trying to undermine that sense of solidarity between races and classes, because they know that if the majority of people started recognizing themselves as in community and in solidarity against the group that's oppressing them, then it doesn't matter if they have 800 like National Guard at their disposal to send to like an uprising city. Like they just don't have the numbers.
Well, I love talking with you. This is exactly the conversation I was hoping to have. I think I needed it, and I think there are people out there who will benefit from hearing it. I'm going to put you on the spot at the end. I hope that's okay. You're so knowledgeable, and you have such a great grasp of this stuff. I have to believe you've done a lot of deep reading. Like you mentioned a book about the state. I forget what it was.
Seeing Like a State, so good. Highly recommend.
All right. So I'm going to ask you, because this is a literary show and it's like original bearing anyway, do you have any book recommendations for people that might help to light the way?
Yeah. James C. Scott, Seeing Like a State, Kimbembe, Necropolitics, Sylvia Federici, Caliban and the Witch, Gloria Anzaldúa. Who else? Oh my
What's
God,
your
so
book?
many. What's my book?
Plug it.
My book is Initiated, Memoir of a Witch. It's a memoir. I'm working on another one right now. So yeah, it's really about my kind of coming to awareness of, my positionality in the world. I guess my coming to understand that like witchcraft is a path towards revolution, towards resistance. And So it tells that story. And now I'm working on something that's more about ecology and land relationship and ritual, and how ritual and relation to the land can help us heal and move forward together. But if you want to find out more about my work, you can go on my Substack, Mystery Cult with Amanda Yates Garcia on Substack. Or you can find me on Instagram, though I haven't been posting as much on there. But yeah, just you can follow my podcast, Between the Worlds podcast. And you know what? I love what you do, Brad. And I do feel like you keep the candle lit. You keep the candle lit for the literary community, for the realms of the imagination, for the realms of spirit. And I also really admire the way that I admire you as a father and a community member and as a friend. You can really feel in relationship with you when you're in your presence, you can really feel your desire to connect and to be in community. And I think that is so what we need right now. And you're keeping this alive for so many people and allowing these conversations to happen. If you didn't do this, these conversations would not happen. There'd be nowhere for them. So thank you so much for creating this space for us. And I'm so grateful for you and the work that you do.
Okay, everybody, there we go. I told you, right? I told you it was going to be good. That was Amanda Yates Garcia, the Oracle of Los Angeles, talking with me about existence and contemporary culture and the darkness and the light, all of it. An excellent conversation. It was good for me. I needed that. Hopefully you found it helpful. You can find Amanda on the internet. Her website is oracleoflosangeles.com. Check out her Substack at amandayatesgarcia.substack.com. You can join her community there. Follow her on Instagram. I recommend it. Her handle there is at Oracle of LA. And her book is called Initiated, Memoir of a Witch. A really excellent memoir. Go get that wherever you get your books. Don't forget to subscribe to the Otherppl Show wherever you get your podcasts. Hit the subscribe button, and you can follow me on Bluesky and Instagram. Sign up for my weekly email newsletter over at bradlisti.substack.com. And if you love this show, if you had a good experience, if you feel like you get something from the work that I do, I hope you will support the show over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Drop a couple of bucks in the hat. I would be grateful. If you want to get an Otherppl t-shirt or a sweatshirt, or if you want to join the Otherppl book club, all of that happens over at the show's official website, www.otherppl.com. And if you want to get How to Write a Novel, the debut course from my new company, Deep Dive, you can get that over at www.deepdive.audio. Help me get this company off the ground. It is an incredible resource, more than 50 hours of never-before-heard insight, instruction, inspiration from dozens of today's most celebrated contemporary authors. Finally, if you have a couple of minutes and you want to do me a quick favor, I would be enormously grateful if you would please rate and review this podcast wherever you listen. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., rate it, review it. It helps the show in the algorithm, and it helps it find new listeners. All right, so that does it for Sunday. In a couple of days, I will be back with a new episode. I'm not going to tell you who the guest is because I don't have it in the can yet, and I'm superstitious. But fingers crossed, there will be a new episode on Tuesday. I will be in conversation with an author talking about a book, and you'll be able to listen to it. That's the plan, all right? Thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you soon. you.